did you know that the Hand Drink Solo content team has produced over 300 videos documenting the rapidly changing South African wine scene? We go gallivanting, literally and metaphorically, across the full breadth of the South African winelands, hunting down unusual cultivars, wild winemaking techniques, emerging regions, and some of the rich and varied untold chapters of South African wine history. But we need your help. We want to know which specific wines or winemakers or emerging regions you have been pondering or which you want to learn more about. We want to use your input in order to guide us in producing content that is both useful and entertaining to wine lovers across the wine world. So here's your chance to have an impact. Drop a comment into the comment section on handdrinksolo.com or on any one of the videos on the Hand Drink Solo YouTube channel. We will then channel our inner Nancy Drew, pack up our Pelican briefcase, and head off to unearth the South African wine stories that you want to hear. But in the interim, it's time for us to discuss today's Hand Drink Solo wine of the day, which is the Radford Vinum Gamay Noir 2022, made by winemaker Jacques de Klerk. There really isn't a lot of Gamay Noir in South Africa. In fact, if winemaker Jacques de Klerk is to be believed, there is only 8 hectares in the entire country. But I think I share his enthusiasm when he says that here in South Africa specifically, we are at a very exciting phase for this little cultivar. Gamay Noir is a French cultivar from Burgundy in France. And if you thought that Burgundy was just about Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, well, then you can be forgiven because it kind of is. Gamay Noir is in some senses a little like Will Ferrell against Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in The Other Guys. However, when Gamay Noir is at home in his little sub-region of Beaujolais within Burgundy, then he gets to feel a little bit more like a big deal. In fact, Beaujolais is where almost all of the Gamay Noir on the planet is planted. A little while back, the winemaking fraternity in Beaujolais suffered an absolutely awful winemaking success because they started making what they called Beaujolais Nouveau, which was Beaujolais wine but fermented purely via carbonic maceration. Now I've left a link below so that you can find out exactly what carbonic maceration is, because I made another video on that. But needless to say, what it does is trigger these light, tutti fruity, bubblegum and candy type wines, which really can be quite fun. The idea was that these wines would be released and sold and drunk very quickly, within months, if not within weeks. Now at first everyone thought this was very exciting, and the wines were all released with a big festival on the 3rd Thursday of November, and there'd be a rapid injection of cash into the winemaker's business. But in the long term, all it really succeeded in doing was making the rest of the wine world forget that Beaujolais could actually make some rather delicious, serious, not carbonic maceration wines. Fortunately, wine lovers are now beginning to remember just how good these conventionally fermented wines from Beaujolais can be. And this is part of the reason why Gamay Noir is entering such an exciting time. It also makes Radford's almost decade-long gamble with the cultivar in South Africa seem rather prescient right now. And I guess this is also why it's a great time for you to explore this cultivar if you haven't already. Gamay Noir is a really interesting cultivar in that it can vary its expression quite a lot depending on where it's planted. For example, in one of the most famous crus in Beaujolais, called Moulin à Vent, which is the king of Beaujolais crus, it produces some fairly structured, slightly more tannic renditions of the grape. Now, it still is Gamay, so at its most structured and tannic, it's kind of medium-bodied with medium tannins. But then you go to the other end of the spectrum, also in Beaujolais, and you go to a little cru called Fleury, and there the wines are really light and floral. In that instance, you'd have a wine that is very light-bodied with light tannins. So I guess one thing that is safe to say, regardless of all the variation, is that you're never going to get a big monster of an icon-style wine out of Gamay Noir. In the broadest sense, I guess, if we set aside the carbonic maceration Beaujolais Nouveau thing, then Gamay Noir will give you a wine that has loads of elements of berries, perhaps a few cherry candy notes as well. It's going to be medium to medium light bodied with medium to medium light tannins, and there will almost certainly be a delightful little hint of potting soil to add some rustic intrigue. Interestingly enough, in the famous Beaujolais crus that I was talking about just now, like Moulin à Vent or Fleury or even Morgon, the soils seem to have a rather prominent granite component, which is very similar to the soils beneath the poker dry vineyard that produces the fruit for today's Vinum Gamay Noir. So when we get into the glass and give this guy a sniff, we do get a really pretty nose, but we also get quite a ripe nose. There are elements of cherry jam and strawberries, a little bit of raspberry candy, as I mentioned, and then slightly spicier red licorice, finished off by a touch of terracotta clay, which is quite interesting. And when we give it a sip, ooh, well, it really is pure pop rock in a glass. There are these really lovely, juicy red cherry elements, but more like cherry sherbet, cherry candy, cherry fizz pop sucker type notes. In part, this is because while it's not a carbonic maceration wine, the fruit is fermented as whole berries. So you will get an element of those carbonic maceration flavors like cherry candy and raspberry sherbet in the wine. The technical term for this sort of process is semi-carbonic maceration. Another element to really love about this wine is the texture on the palate is so supremely silky. After that wave of effervescent cherry elements, there's also sweeter, softer strawberry, but perhaps it's a little more like strawberry preserve than fresh strawberries, although definitely not in an overly sweet sort of way. Then as you move towards the finish of the wine, that strawberry note seems to tail off a bit, and what comes out is a lovely hint of pepper spice, which you might not have expected. And then on the finish, there's like a resurgence of that juicy, fresh red cherry element that comes out and leaves your mouth watering for the next sip. One thing that is definitely worth doing with this wine is to start out serving it chilled and then watch how it changes as it warms up in the glass. Okay, so that's all we have time for today. But if you enjoyed the video, then support us on Patreon so that we can make more of these sorts of videos. And also subscribe to the Hendrik Solo YouTube channel, where we publish at least 6 videos each month talking about things like wine science, wine history, unusual cultivars, and some of the dynamic winemaking stars that are coming out of the South African winelands.